Hello again. This is the boy and his Bible again, with a dose of the man in him, of course. When I read Habakkuk, our book for today, as a boy, well, wrote it out by hand, it was not the most difficult book to grasp at a certain level. And I think it's maybe that level that I might be still talking about today. The basic levels are the big lessons that I learned. I built on that later with my reading and meeting so many people. And when you read Habakkuk, he's grumbling, is in an argument with God. He has some very difficult questions and he's thrown them at God. And the tone of his letter starts off very negatively against God. Jonah had a negative against God for one reason. This is for another reason. And it goes like this. We've looked back on our history and we've seen tremendous things take place in spite of all the difficulties that we've imposed upon ourselves. Yes, we failed, but good things have happened. We had the tabernacle in the wilderness. That was a good thing. We had the ark in coming into the land. That was a good thing. Oh, we made mistakes, but the ark was with us. And eventually David wanted to put the ark in a building like the building that he got, not in a tent, but in a permanent building. God tells him he can't build that temple, but he allows Solomon to build it. And he gets pays for all the stuff that goes into the temple and the temple itself. And the temple, many years later, is eventually built from the days of David. Oh, yes, we've made mistakes, but when we discovered the Lord and read it, wasn't that a revival? And now look what you're doing, God. We have not been the bad baddie of the nations around us. We've not committed the cruelty that we've seen in the nation of Israel, in the nation of Assyria or the nation of Babylon. We don't have their kind of wars. Most of our wars have been petty wars by comparison. So why are you bringing this army against us? This dreadful army, done far things worse than we are. Can you use them to bring about your salvation, your judgment, your purpose? You can't be kidding. It seems to be so unfair. And that's the argument. Why let an evil nation judge a less evil nation? A bad nation judge a bad nation. Well, beside the single obvious that maybe you're far worse than you thought you were because you had more light than the Babylonians, and so you've fallen further. Beside that observation, God wants to teach him a very important lesson. And he teaches him that lesson. And that lesson is that he doesn't know the way of God, but God has been working his purposes out in mercy and in judgment since the beginning of time. Right there, right from the very book of Genesis and onwards, his purposes have been worked out, constantly worked out. And in a tower, which we use for watching out to see when the enemy was coming and the force of the enemy, he prays. And he turns his hard questions into simple prayers. And as he prays, then he gets the assurance that what life is about is the just shall live by their faith in God. And there were many just people in the land of Israel. We know that from the Psalms. That at a time of rejection, there was also time when people talked often one to another, and the Lord remembered. And a book was written in his presence of their deeds and their words and their devotion. Oh yes, there was good people at the time. However, as you read the book of Habakkuk in these few short chapters, 3 chapters, what jumps out to you is the just shall live by their faith in God. What keeps them alive in righteousness and justice is the faith that they have in God, and something works inside them from God. The miracle of grace, you say? Well, why not? The triumphant of truth in their soul, you say? Well, why not? The penetration of mercy into their lives, you say? Well, why not? You see, these things are there for our learning, as we learn from the New Testament. And that's the scriptures are lent for our learning. So you start off with why, Lord? Why has so much suffering taken place with your people? And why so much injustice in the way you've brought up an evil nation against them? Why is it you keep telling me there's much more to come? How can you do this, O Lord? How can you do this? But God shows what he is doing. First of all, it's on the basis of truth. God's keeping his purposes and his promises. And the judgments of God will follow. But in between time, faith can work in your life. Why God hates injustice? There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things I've identified of being unjust. How God is on the way, and in the last section of the 3rd chapter, which is well worth remembering, when it talks about the fact that although everything has gone wrong, yet I will put my trust in the Lord. Yet I will put my trust in the Lord. Romans chapter 8 could be fitted quite neatly and easy into that section. Let's look briefly at the few points here. The first one is that God is against injustice, and God's strange purposes will be worked out, but we are to live by faith. Shall I say that again? The injustices we need to project ourselves with God against. God has strange purposes that we don't understand, and we have to accept them by faith. And living by faith is faith. And living by faith is living. Faith and love is living. And that has to be learned. So there's arguing with God. Yes, we do that sometimes. There's discerning to do God's will and to be part of God's purposes. The longing for a renewal, that's turned away a longing for revenge. It's a longing for renewal. Trust in God no matter what. That's what you have here. The sovereign Lord is my strength, he would say. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer. He enables me to go on the heights. Nothing is in front of me that I'm afraid of. I can go there as swift as a deer. The open plains are there, the bushes and the trees are there. I would not be afraid. I live by faith, not by sight. And the vision of the deer is a spiritual sight. I leap and I jump and I run because I'm not afraid. Not because I'm afraid. When the deer leaps and jumps and runs, it's because they are afraid. I'll do it when I'm not afraid. This is the book of Habakkuk. That's well worth reading. Boy in his Bible. Thank you for being here.